All right, joining us next on the show today, he's a retired U.S. Army colonel, combat veteran, author, consultant, military TV analyst, and amazing commentator when he does it here on Steak for Breakfast. Colonel Douglas Macgregor, thanks for joining us again on the show.
Absolutely.
Well, I wish we had some good stuff to talk about, but it seems like things have gotten increasingly worse since the last time we've had you join us. And, you're kind of watching this entire situation. It's gone well outside of Ukraine and Russia right now. You did, obviously talk to our listenership last time about the proxy connections between places like Russia and China, and they're heavily involved in all of this stuff. But now Iran has kind of risen to the level of being one of these major players in the game as well. And if you just want to start off kind of like in real time, how you see the entire world getting lit on fire right now with a little commentary on that, our listenership would probably really appreciate it.
Well, I'd keep in mind that Ukraine, for all intents and purposes, is in ruins. It's lost its war with Russia. The Russians are moving very slowly and deliberately because, frankly, once they've taken Kharkov to the north and Odessa in the south, given where they are right now, they will have captured all of the territory that is historically Russian. And what the Russians really don't want to do is govern Ukrainians. In other words, they don't want to advance much further and then end up with a population of people who obviously don't want to live under Russian rule. So I think Putin is working behind the scenes to try and restrain Russian forces, to prevent them from advancing too far too quickly, in the hopes that someone in Europe will wake up and recognize that it's time to put an end to this travesty. We obviously refuse to do that. And in fact, if you look at this latest budgetary request from the White House, we're shipping $60 billion to Ukraine. And people are saying, well, my God, is this more weaponry and so forth? But in truth, Ukraine's on life support. The patient is effectively dead. The heart beats barely. It's hooked up. And about all you can do is give it periodically a shave and a haircut, but you're not going to rescue this patient. The patient is dead. And now at the same time, thankfully, I suppose, in some respects, from Biden's standpoint and his friends on the Hill, a new opportunity for madness has presented itself. And that is in the Middle East. You have lots of very foolish people who've decided that this is something that Israel and the United States should capitalize on, that this is Israel's time to strike and wage a war of annihilation against Gaza and its population, without understanding that this is enraging the entire Muslim world, from Morocco all the way to Indonesia.
Yep.
And we're also pretending, and I think the Israelis are making this mistake as well, that the region is largely unchanged from what it was 50 years ago. That, just as they went through something similar in 73, where they were surprised and had to rebound from it, now they think, well, we'll take advantage of this and we'll just settle our differences. And Netanyahu, who effectively, for all intents and purposes, controls the United States Congress and effectively determines what we will do for them militarily and otherwise, thinks that this is the moment to crush Hamas. Problem is, Hamas is probably not going to be crushed. If they go into Gaza at all, they're going to take heavy casualties. They'll kill lots of people, most of whom are not necessarily part of Hamas. The international situation will get worse. And, Hamas is more than just a group of people. It's an idea. And it's very difficult to kill ideas. You can kill lots of people, but killing ideas is a tough challenge. And in the meantime, you've got a very ominous development. Iran, of course, is a very powerful state. People act as though, well, it's backward. Not really. You've got to look at its arsenal of missiles, its developments in aerospace science, its technology, its engineers. No, Iran does not possess a large ground force that it would hurl into action, but it can reasonably destroy Israel with the missile arsenal at its disposal. Then you have an even more ominous development, and that is the Turks have now effectively said, if this does not stop, we will intervene and go to war with Israel. Well, Turkey has almost 90 million people, has the largest army in NATO, large air forces, large everything. It has the largest drone fleet, over 500 or something in that neighborhood of dangerous drones in the world, whereas Great Britain has 10, the Turks have over 500. So do the Iranians. They've developed some of the most lethal things. And what's really interesting about this is that the Shia and the Sunni have always been at one another's throats. And Israel seems to have achieved something that nobody else has in the last 1,000 years, and that is to unite Sunni and Shia against it.
Yeah.
We are now shipping over, as I understand it, at least 4 carrier battle groups, along with battalions of air and missile defense forces, probably a couple of thousand special forces. Remember, we've already got 1,000 American soldiers in Syria, in close proximity to both Turkey and Iran, which is not a good thing. A couple of weeks ago, we shot down a Turkish drone. And this morning, I guess, we launched strikes at Iranian-backed militias in the area. It looks bad. And I don't think we're ready for any of it. We don't have any ground forces to send. The U.S. Army is down to 450,000. It's obviously demoralized and miserable. I don't think we're in a position to do much. A couple of thousand Marines sitting offshore is interesting, but not terribly potent. And if they try to go ashore, they'll be nice targets, but I don't think they're going to add much. So the best that we can do is launch air power and cruise missiles, which we've already begun. This puts us at war, obviously, with Iran and potentially Turkey. And once Turkey and Iran are both engaged, I would expect the Russians to come in, simply because Russia is a de facto ally of Iran. Iran has supported Russia in Ukraine. And, you know, the disappointing thing for Moscow is that Moscow was always accommodating the Israelis in Syria and in the region. And it made it very clear, for instance, to Iran that if you put anything on the ground in Syria, we won't protect it. You're on your own. And whenever the Israelis announced that they wanted to strike targets in Syria, the Russians have informed the Syrians, shut down the air defenses, and let them in. But the Israelis, unfortunately, decided to support Ukraine, sending over Mossad as well as ammunition and other technical and intelligence assets. So the Russians no longer feel as though they should accommodate the Israelis. So you have the potential for a very large regional war that honestly we're not prepared to fight. And remember, we've already weakened our war stocks dramatically.
Yep.
Everything that we have is being shipped over to Ukraine. If we get into a real knockdown, drag-out battle, it's going to be very hard for us to sustain it. But no one seems to be thinking. I think everyone's emoting. You know, this is all very emotional. We look at pictures. We're horrified and join Israel in its disgust. And we are also looking now at the death of 3,000 children out of 7,000 or 8,000 killed in Gaza, and we're equally horrified. So everyone is emoting. No one is really thinking. Now, this morning it was reported that ceasefire talks are actually underway between the Israelis and our friends in Hamas. Well, you know, let's hope something good happens. Qatar is apparently mediating.
Yeah.
It'd be nice if something happened, but I'm skeptical. And I think the Israelis are skeptical. They really want to finish the job. But it's also possible that they're beginning to realize that they're soon going to confront the whole Muslim world plus, and that perhaps that's not a good idea. I don't know. I hope so. I hope somebody is sobering up.
Yeah, it's just wild. And as you're saying that, I'm watching in real time on the news here. There are airstrikes that are happening in northern Gaza right now. It's the 1 o'clock hour on the East Coast here on our Friday edition of the show. The airstrikes, the munitions that they're using are so large that they can be seen for over 10 miles away with the Israeli strikes. And then, you know, when you talk about all these players in the game, you mentioned Qatar late, you know, that's where a big portion of the Hamas leadership lives and are protected. Yep. Iran has brought itself back after Donald Trump's foreign policy almost choked them out of existence, but based off of the fact that, you know, there was a real potential if Donald Trump would have stayed in office that you could have seen some kind of internal revolution there. He had crushed their global standing all the way down to less than $4 billion a year, and now just off of their energy revenue, they're bringing in over 70. In addition to that, it's whatever Joe Biden decides to give them in forms of aid and pallets of cash, and it's really emboldened them to just be another major player back back in this game. And then when you see high delegations of the Iranian regime going over to Russia just this week, you saw the foreign minister who's on every terror watch list on the planet walking the streets freely in New York while he's addressing the UN General Assembly. It just shows that, so many people have been crying about Russia and China, Russia and China, Russia and China for so long, and they are huge threats to American sovereignty. But now the fact of the matter is we've added another, I guess, shell to the arsenal of people who are just looking out to end us. And by Israel tripping into this ground offensive into Gaza, where it's going to be, like you probably said before, Colonel, it's going to be a buzzsaw when they go in there. It doesn't look good for us and our allies.
No, in fact, we may have already sustained some losses that have not been reported because we sent some special ops soldiers into Gaza with some Israelis in a short raid. This is a couple of days ago with only one tank, and they had the living daylights shot out of them. So Hamas, despite all of these bombings, thanks to tunnels that are down to at least 50 to 70 feet underground and reinforced steel and concrete, I think is quite prepared and looking forward to the battle that will ensue as 10 or 15 or 20,000 Israeli infantrymen try to sort through those ruins. And the advantage, of course, will be with Hamas, because once you've rubbled a city, it's much easier to defend than a city that is intact.
Yeah.
Now, as far as Russia and China, I don't agree with the characterization of those states as our enemies. We've made a lot of enemies. Russia was never necessarily an enemy of the United States. We've worked hard to offend them and alienate them. We've broken our promises to them. As far as China is concerned, it's in the midst of a serious economic turndown. They've got a real crisis at home. They're not interested in going to war with anybody. But remember, Iran produces 2 to 3 million barrels of oil a day. 20% of the world's oil supply moves every month through the Straits of Hormuz, along with 25% of the world's liquid, natural gas, liquefied natural gas. China depends on that. So China has a small flotilla of ships that operate between India, the Persian Gulf, and Africa. Their purpose is to escort vessels carrying food and other supplies like oil and natural gas to China. They're very concerned, and so China will do everything in its power to try and persuade the world to step back from what is a regional war that China is very much afraid of. So I don't agree with the view on China. I never have. And anybody who spends time in Northeast Asia, as I have, sees China through a very different lens. China is not Imperial Japan, and we shouldn't mistake it for that. It's certainly not the Soviet Union. And Russia is not the Soviet Union. If anything, it's closer to what Tsarist Russia used to be. So I think we're provoking this simply because we are effectively providing the Israelis with a blank check.
Yep.
And that is very dangerous. Small states, all small states are always interested in leveraging big states for their purposes. It makes perfect sense. And if I were sitting there right now as an Israeli looking at things, angry over what's happened with Hamas and regarding Gaza as a permanent cancer that has to be cut out, I would turn and try to leverage the United States. I mean, right now, Mr. Netanyahu can have whatever he wants for the asking. He effectively controls Congress, and he's got pretty much whatever he wants at this stage. But it's dangerous because the average American, when confronted with a large regional war involving multiple major powers, is going to wake up at some point and say, what are we doing? How did this happen? I don't think you're going to find very many Americans on the street when they finally understand what's going on that thinks it's a good idea for us to go to war with essentially the Muslim world, specifically Iran and Turkey, as well as China and Russia. Now, I don't think the Chinese are going to come in anytime soon unless we provoke them. But I do think the Russians will have to make a decision as the war develops. And it's hard for me to imagine them allowing Iran or Turkey or both to be destroyed by us. I don't think that's going to go down very well. So we're on the precipice of something really, really bad. And we have no diplomacy. I don't think we have any strategy other than we agree with you, BB. Go for it.
That's the best point you make, and it's the last thing I want to touch with you on, Colonel, because this is the there. We, the United States, are literally funding both sides of every foreign war on the planet, especially in the Middle East. Where we send aid is the same places that we send artillery and munitions to, and I just don't understand how more people can't wake up to the fact that the military-industrial complex and the international lobby groups have more power than our Congress, than our Senate, and our president combined. And they are literally the grease that keeps these gears rolling, and until people start trying to stop that huge apparatus, we're going to be continuing to be in this situation for the entirety of our republic. And I just want you to provide a little commentary on that note, because I think it's the most important factor here. You can talk about all the strategy and the players involved and stuff like that, but when you talk about how are these people in these third world crap hole countries able to stand up and have great military forces and continue to arm themselves and just deprive their people for so many years, and when you look back to the physical receipts, it's because the United States has been funding everyone forever.
Well, I'm sure you must have seen the photographs of the various American military equipment, arms, and munitions that came from Ukraine to Hamas.
Yep.
I mean, this is our great achievement in Ukraine, probably one of the most corrupt nations in the world, certainly the most corrupt in Europe. We've managed to turn them into an arms bazaar. And of course, they transship a lot of this through Kosovo,
Yeah.
another creature of our foreign policy, which is also hopelessly corrupt and a transition point for, Islamist radicals and killers and terrorists, as well as munitions and arms into the wrong hands. So that's one thing. The second thing is there isn't much daylight between the characters or the entities or the institutions you just mentioned. Remember, Congress sees itself as existing for one purpose: to pass legislation that transfers money. In other words, they're all about spending. And they'll tell you privately, if I don't spend money, then what am I here for? And by the way, he also, or she also will imply, if I don't spend money, I'm not going to make much, because the salaries for those congressmen are not substantial. The costs of moving to and back and forth from Washington and travel are not cheap. So everyone has his hand out in Washington to all the lobbies, whatever those lobbies are. Everybody is promising everybody something in order to get cash. So then you come to the defense industry, and the defense industry is like every other private sector firm. They want to make money. The problem is that we've consolidated these industries into 5 major ones, to the point where one wonders, as you point out, who's really in control. The 5 industries, who are de facto state-sponsored industries, or, people in the military and people at the top of the government. It's hard to tell. But there's one thing that we can say with absolute certainty: Washington is swimming in cash.
Yeah.
Everybody's getting rich, and they're very happy about that. And they don't understand what's at stake. They don't understand the dangers involved. I mean, neither Russia nor we nor China are going to use nuclear weapons. It's not going to happen. We all understand what that means. The Israelis, though, they have nuclear weapons. And the Turks know that in a pinch, Pakistan will provide them with nuclear weapons. So if they need nuclear warheads to either deter Israel or to strike at them, they'll get them. This is not a good situation to be in. We should be looking for solutions, however imperfect, that buy us time to make new territorial arrangements, new arrangements for the people to live inside these borders, whatever is required. But nobody's interested because the money is flowing like a flood.
It's wild, Colonel. And I tell you what, you've really provided some insight onto the entirety of this developing situation around the world today. We really can't appreciate enough when you take some time to come and share with our listenership. We're always going to be looking to have you back again on the show next month. And we're going to be live linking ourcountryourchoice.com in the show description today, as well as your website, where you could read some of the great op-eds that you often put out. We always share them on the show here on our social medias, and we'll live link your X page as well. I want everybody to just one more time think about what was said today. Take a strong look at everything that's going on right now, and just see how this developing situation in real time is very accurately described here and kind of unpacked for our listenership by this retired U.S. Army colonel, providing some great insight today. Douglas Macgregor, thanks for joining us.
Hey, thanks, guys. All the best.